An 18-year-old virgin girl was given to a millionaire as a form of payment. Instead of treating her like property, the millionaire teaches her, supports her, but keeps a distance that makes her question his true intentions. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. Emma Mitchell stared at the rejection letter in her hands. Her 18th such disappointment in 3 months. The community college scholarship, her last hope for education beyond high school, had been denied. Outside the window of their small apartment in South Boston, rain pattered against the glass, mirroring the tears she refused to let fall. "Maybe next time, honey," her mother Karen said, placing a worn hand on Emma's shoulder. The gesture, meant to comfort, only intensified the weight pressing against her chest. Emma knew there wouldn't be a next time, not this year, not with her mother's medical bills piling up and their rent increasing again. She folded the letter, carefully, tucking it into the drawer with all the others, a growing collection of closed doors. At 18, Emma had watched her mother sacrifice everything just to keep them afloat. Karen Mitchell had worked double shifts at the diner since Emma was 5, the year her father had walked out without so much as a goodbye. For 13 years, it had been just the two of them against a world that seemed determined to keep them. "Down? I'll find something else, Mom," Emma said, forcing a smile. "Maybe Mr. Harris will give me more hours at the grocery store." Karen's expression tightened. "You already work 30 hours a week while finishing high school. You need to sleep." "Sometime." Emma shrugged. "Sleep is overrated." Her phone buzzed with a notification from her best friend, Zoe. "Don't forget graduation rehearsal tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp." Graduation. The word felt hollow now. While her classmates prepared for college or gap years abroad, Emma would be joining the ranks of full-time minimum wage workers, another generation trapped in the cycle her mother had never escaped. Emma glanced at the small bookshelf beside her bed, filled with used copies of classics and borrowed library books. Her entire childhood, she'd believed that education would be her way out, that knowledge would transcend circumstance. Now, reality had settled in with crushing finality. Later that night, Emma woke to the sound of her mother's muffled sobs from the kitchen. She crept down the narrow hallway and paused at the edge of the doorway. Karen sat at their small table, bills spread before her, a calculator displaying a number that made Emma's stomach clench. "Mom?" she whispered. Karen quickly wiped her eyes. "Just sorting some things out, sweetheart." "How bad is it?" Her mother hesitated, then pushed the stack of papers toward her. Emma's eyes widened as she scanned the medical bills, the past due notices, the final warnings. "Your treatments," Emma whispered, the reality hitting her. Her mother's rheumatoid arthritis had worsened over the past year, requiring specialized care their insurance barely covered. "I'll figure it out," Karen said with forced confidence. "I always do." But Emma saw the truth in her mother's eyes. This time was different. This time there was no way out. The following week, as Emma donned her graduation gown in their tiny bathroom, her reflection in the mirror showed the shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights spent job hunting. The ceremony passed in a blur, names called, caps thrown, futures launched. Emma smiled for photos with Zoe and accepted congratulations from teachers who praised her potential, unaware it would remain just that, potential. 3 days after graduation, Emma returned from her shift at the grocery store to find a black luxury sedan parked outside their apartment building. The sight was so incongruous in their neighborhood that she paused on the sidewalk, wondering if someone was lost. When she entered their apartment, the answer became clear. A man in an impeccably tailored suit sat on their worn couch, his presence transforming their humble living room into something smaller, dingier by comparison. Beside him, Karen looked pale, a document clutched in her trembling hands. "Emma," her mother said, voice strained, "this is Mr. Alexander Blackwood." The man stood, towering at well over 6 feet. He couldn't have been more than 40, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that assessed Emma with startling intensity. "Miss Mitchell," he said, extending a hand. His voice carried the polished accent of old money and elite education. "A pleasure to meet you." Emma shook his hand automatically, noticing the contrast between her calloused fingers and his manicured grip. "What's going on?" Mr. Blackwood gestured for her to sit. "Your mother and I were just discussing a business arrangement." "Business?" Emma looked to Karen, whose eyes remained fixed on the document. "Mr. Blackwood has offered to help with our financial situation," Karen explained quietly. Alexander Blackwood leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'm a businessman. Miss Mitchell, I solve problems. Your mother came to me with a problem, and I've proposed a solution." "You went to him?" Emma asked, confusion edging into her voice. Karen finally looked up, guilt etched across her face. "I had no choice, Emma. The medical bills, the rent. We're going to lose everything. My company specializes in high-interest loans for those whom traditional banks won't help," Blackwood explained smoothly. "Your mother approached one of my representatives last month." Emma's mind raced. Last month, when Karen had disappeared for an entire afternoon without explanation. "How much?" she asked. $50,000, Blackwood replied, as casually as if discussing the weather. Emma felt the room spin. The amount was astronomical to them, more than Karen made in 2 years. "The terms are straightforward," he continued. "The loan is due in full in 6 months, with 20% interest." "That's $60,000, Emma calculated aloud. "Mom, there's no way—" "If your mother cannot repay the loan," Blackwood interrupted, his gaze settling on Emma with unsettling focus, "there is an alternative arrangement." Karen made a small, wounded sound. "What arrangement?" Emma demanded. Blackwood's expression remained impassive. "You." The single word hung in the air between them. "Me? You would come work for me directly, 1 year of service to clear the debt in full." Emma stared at him incredulously. "What kind of work?" "That would be determined based on your skills and aptitudes. My organization has many positions that need filling." Karen stood suddenly. "I've changed my mind. We'll find another way." Blackwood didn't even glance in her direction. "The documents are signed, Mrs. Mitchell. The money has already been transferred to your account. Our agreement is binding." Emma watched her mother sink back into her chair, defeated. "You have 6 months, Blackwood continued, rising to his feet. "I suggest you use the funds wisely." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, placing it on their coffee table. "Should you need to reach me directly, Miss Mitchell?" After he left, the apartment seemed to exhale as though his presence had consumed all the oxygen. "What have you done?" Emma whispered. Karen buried her face in her hands. "I was desperate, Emma. They were going to evict us next week. The hospital was sending our bills to collections, I thought. I thought I could find a way to pay it back." "And if you can't, you're just going to hand me over to him like some kind of collateral?" "Of course not," Karen cried. "We'll find a way. We have 6 months." But looking at her mother's face, Emma knew there would be no miracle. The loan was a sentence, not a salvation. That night, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling as rain began to fall again outside her window. She thought of Alexander Blackwood, of the cold calculation in his eyes as he'd appraised her. What kind of man offered such an arrangement? What kind of service would he expect? The questions circled her mind until dawn broke, and with the first light came a resolution. She would find a way to save her mother from this deal, whatever it took. What Emma couldn't know was that Alexander Blackwood had been searching for someone exactly like her, that the loan, the terms, the entire arrangement had been orchestrated long before her mother ever walked into his office, that his interest in Emma Mitchell went far deeper than debt collection, and that the secrets binding them had been set in motion nearly 2 decades ago when her father disappeared from their lives forever. 5 months passed with agonizing swiftness. Emma worked double shifts at the grocery store, picked up weekend cleaning jobs, and even tried her hand at freelance content writing, anything to chip away at the mountain of debt looming before them. But despite her efforts and the small amount they managed to save, it wasn't nearly enough. The $60,000 deadline approached like an oncoming train, unstoppable and devastating. Their apartment now had a working heater. Karen's medicine cabinet was stocked with prescriptions she'd previously been unable to afford, and they no longer had to count pennies at the grocery store. But these comforts came at a price neither of them could quantify. On a crisp October morning, Emma sat across from her mother at their kitchen table, a calculator between them, displaying a number that confirmed what they already knew. They had barely made a dent in the loan. "Maybe we could sell the car," Emma suggested, desperation edging into her voice. Karen shook her head. "It's worth $4,000 at best. We'd still be tens of thousands short." The unspoken alternative hung between them. Emma reached for her phone and pulled up an email she'd received the previous week, a third reminder from Alexander Blackwood's office, requesting her presence for a preliminary assessment before her. Potential employment began. "I should at least go see what this is about," Emma said quietly. Karen's face crumpled. "I won't let him take you, Emma. I'll find another way." But they both knew there was no other way. The contract Karen had signed was ironclad, reviewed by Emma's friend Zoe's father, who practiced law. If they defaulted, Blackwood could pursue legal action that would leave them homeless and Karen potentially incarcerated for fraud. "It's just a meeting," Emma reassured her mother, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. "I'll hear what he has to say." The Blackwood Tower rose 58 stories above downtown Boston, a gleaming spire of glass and steel that housed the headquarters of Blackwood Enterprises, a multinational conglomerate with holdings in everything from pharmaceuticals to media. Emma's reflection looked small and out of place in the polished lobby doors as she approached, wearing the nicest outfit she owned, black slacks and a blue blouse she'd bought for graduation interviews. At the reception desk, a woman with a perfect blonde chignon barely glanced up. "Name?" "Emma Mitchell. I have an appointment with Mr. Blackwood." The receptionist's fingers paused on her keyboard, her expression shifting subtly as she looked at Emma with new interest. "Of course, Miss Mitchell. Mr. Blackwood is expecting. Lucas will escort you." A security guard appeared at her side, leading her to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. They ascended in silence, the numbers climbing until they reached the top floor. When the doors opened, Emma stepped into a reception area larger than her entire apartment. "This way, please," a different assistant said, leading her through double doors into an expansive office where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. Alexander Blackwood stood with his back to her, gazing out at the water. Unlike their first meeting, he wore no suit jacket, just a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle. "Miss Mitchell," he said without turning. "Punctual. I appreciate that quality." Emma remained silent, her heart pounding in her throat. He finally turned to face her, those penetrating grey eyes assessing her with the same unsettling intensity she remembered. "Please sit." She perched on the edge of a leather chair across from his massive desk, resisting the urge to fidget under his gaze. "I assume you're here because you've realized the loan cannot be repaid through conventional means," he said, taking his own seat. "We've managed to save $12,000, Emma replied, lifting her chin. "If you could extend the deadline—" "The terms were clear," he interrupted, his tone not unkind but unyielding. "Your mother agreed to them with full understanding of the consequences." Emma swallowed hard. "Then why am I here? Why not just send debt collectors?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Because I'm offering you an alternative, Miss Mitchell. A rather generous one, I might add." He pressed a button on his desk, and a section of the wall slid open to reveal a hidden screen. It illuminated with Emma's high school transcript, work history, even her social media profiles. "You graduated with a 3.9 GPA despite working 30 hours a week," Blackwood noted. "You scored in the 98th percentile on your SATs. You were accepted to Boston University, Northwestern, and Columbia, but couldn't attend due to financial constraints." Emma stared at him. "You've been investigating me. I investigate all potential investments thoroughly. I'm not an investment. I'm a person." His eyes met hers. "Everyone is an investment, Miss Mitchell. The question is whether the return will be worth the risk." He rose and walked to a sideboard, pouring 2 glasses of water. "I'm prepared to offer you a position within my organization, 1 year of service, after which your mother's debt will be cleared in full. Additionally, you'll receive a stipend For living expenses. What kind of position? Emma asked warily. That depends on you. He handed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers briefly. I have a unique opportunity that might suit someone with your potential. Which is? I need someone I can shape, Miss Mitchell. Someone intelligent but unformed by the corporate world. Someone who can learn to see things from my perspective. He returned to his desk. You would be, for lack of a better term, my protégé. Emma nearly choked on her water. Your protégé? Why me? There must be thousands of graduates with better qualifications who jump at that chance. Yet none of them interest me. His gaze was steady, revealing nothing. Those with privilege often lack hunger. You possess a quality they don't. The desperation to rise above your circumstances, whatever the cost. His bluntness stung, but Emma couldn't deny the truth in his words. What would I be doing exactly? Learning, observing, eventually assisting me directly in managing certain aspects of my business. He slid a document across the desk. The position includes accommodations in my residential building, a car service, appropriate wardrobe, and comprehensive health care for both you and your mother. Emma skimmed the contract, her eyes widening at the stipend amount. It was more than she'd make in 3 years at the grocery store. And, after a year, if you prove valuable, I may offer continued employment. If not, you're free to go, the debt cleared regardless. It seemed too good to be true. There has to be a catch. Blackwood's expression remained impassive. The catch, Miss Mitchell, is that for 1 year your life belongs to me. You go where I go, you work when I work, your priorities become my priorities. That sounds like ownership, not employment. A crude distinction. I prefer to think of it as an apprenticeship with unusually high stakes. He leaned forward. Consider the alternative. Your mother loses everything. You spend the next decade trying to dig out from under crippling debt while watching her health deteriorate without proper care. The brutal assessment hit home. Emma looked away, her eyes burning. When would I start? Immediately, today, in fact. Her head snapped up. Today? But I need to tell my mother. Pack my things. Already taken care of. Your mother was informed this morning that you would likely not be returning home. Your possessions will be packed and delivered to your new accommodations. Anger flared in Emma's chest. You were that confident I'd agree? Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. I've yet to miscalculate when it comes to human nature, Miss Mitchell, especially when survival is at stake. The reality of what she was agreeing to settled over Emma like a weight. 1 year of her life signed away to this enigmatic, calculating man. Yet what choice did she have? I need to speak with my mother first. Blackwood nodded once, gesturing to a phone on his desk. Of course. The call was brief and tearful. Karen alternated between apologies and reassurances, finally extracting a promise from Emma to call every day. When she hung up, Emma's hand trembled slightly. I have conditions, she said, summoning her remaining courage. Blackwood raised an eyebrow, seeming almost amused. Do you? My mother's medical care continues without interruption. I get to see her at least twice a month, and whatever this job entails, it can't involve anything illegal or, she hesitated, inappropriate. Define inappropriate, he prompted, his expression unreadable. Emma felt heat rise to her face. You know exactly what I mean. For the first time, Blackwood laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his austere features. Your virtue is safe with me, Miss Mitchell. I have no interest in adding sexual harassment to my list of transgressions. He stood and extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Emma looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face, searching for deceit, for hidden malice. She found only calm certainty. She took his hand. We have an agreement. What? Followed was a whirlwind that left Emma breathless. Within hours, she was escorted to a sleek apartment in a high-rise overlooking the Charles River, her new home. A woman named Miranda appeared, bearing clothing in Emma's size, explaining she was Emma's transition coordinator. Mr. Blackwood requires you ready for dinner at 7. Miranda explained, gesturing to an elegant black dress laid out on the bed. "The car will collect you at 6:30. Left alone, Emma wandered through the apartment in a daze. The kitchen was stocked with foods she'd never tried, the bathroom filled with luxury products, the closet now containing clothing worth more than everything she'd ever owned. As she showered and dressed, reality began to sink in. She had traded one prison for another, albeit a gilded one. Yet something about Alexander Blackwood nagged at her. Despite his ruthless efficiency, she'd glimpsed something in his eyes when he spoke of shaping her, something almost like recognition. At Yai. Precisely 6:30, the house phone rang announcing her car. In the elevator down to the lobby, Emma caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, a stranger in an expensive dress, her hair styled by the building salon at Miranda's insistence. The black sedan waiting outside purred with quiet luxury. The driver opened her door without a word, and as Emma settled into the leather seat, she noticed a small envelope on the console beside her. Inside was a card bearing a single sentence in elegant handwriting. "The transformation begins tonight." Emma stared at the words, a chill running through her despite the car's warmth. Whatever game Alexander Blackwood was playing, she was now irrevocably part of it. The sedan pulled away from the curb, carrying her deeper into his world, away from everything she'd ever known. What she couldn't see was the man watching from the penthouse of her building, his silhouette dark against the Boston skyline. Alexander Blackwood raised a glass in silent toast as the car disappeared into traffic, satisfaction in his eyes, and an old photograph clutched in his other hand, a faded image of a young woman with Emma's eyes and smile. "Phase 1 complete," he murmured to himself. "Let's see if she's truly her father's daughter." 3 months into her arrangement with Alexander Blackwood, Emma's life had transformed beyond recognition. Gone was the struggling girl from South Boston, replaced by a polished young woman who moved through Boston's elite circles with growing confidence. Her days were filled with intensive education. Private tutors in business, economics, and international relations brought to her apartment each morning, followed by afternoons shadowing Blackwood at his company. Tonight, she stood beside him at a charity gala in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, wearing a midnight blue gown that cost more than her mother's monthly rent. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, her posture perfect after weeks of etiquette training. "Senator Harrison is approaching," Blackwood murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Remember what I told you about him?" Emma nodded slightly, recalling the dossier she'd memorized. The senator was a key vote on legislation that would affect Blackwood's pharmaceutical division, information she was to subtly utilize during conversation. "Mr. Blackwood," the senator boomed, clapping Alexander on the shoulder. "And who is this lovely young lady?" "Senator Harrison, may I present Emma Mitchell, my executive assistant and protégé." Emma extended her hand with practiced grace. "A pleasure, Senator. I've been following your work on the Healthcare Committee with great interest." What followed was a carefully choreographed dance of words, Emma dropping just enough insight to intrigue the senator, Blackwood smoothly steering the conversation toward his interests. By the time Harrison moved on, Blackwood's subtle nod told Emma she'd performed perfectly. "You're learning quickly," he said as they moved through the crowd. "I have a motivated teacher," she replied. His lips quirked in that almost smile she'd come to recognize. "Flattery, Miss Mitchell. How unlike you." Not flattery, acknowledgement. In truth, Emma was conflicted about her rapid adaptation to this new life. Part of her thrilled at the intellectual stimulation, the resources suddenly at her disposal, the doors opening before her. But another part remained wary, watching for the trap she still believed must exist beneath Blackwood's generosity. Each day revealed new facets of this enigmatic man. He could be brutally demanding one moment, surprisingly considerate the next. He expected excellence but recognized effort, and occasionally, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him studying her with an expression she couldn't decipher, something between curiosity and concern. "Mr. Blackwood," a silky voice interrupted Emma's thoughts. She turned to see a striking woman in her 40s, elegant in crimson, her eyes fixed on Alexander with familiar intensity. "Victoria," Alexander acknowledged coolly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," the woman replied, her gaze shifting to Emma with razor-sharp assessment. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your assistant?" Something in her tone made Emma stiffen. "Emma Mitchell, this is Victoria Hargrove, CEO of Hargrove Industries." The tension in Alexander's voice was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand gripped Emma's with surprising strength. "So you're the latest project. How fascinating." "Project?" Emma kept her voice neutral despite the insult. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Alexander has a pattern of collecting strays, though I must say he usually prefers them with more pedigree." Before Emma could respond, Alexander's hand pressed lightly against her lower back. "We're needed elsewhere, Victoria. If you'll excuse us." As they moved away, Emma felt Victoria's gaze boring into her back. "An old friend?" she asked, keeping her voice light. "An old mistake," Alexander replied curtly. "One I'd prefer not to discuss." But Emma had glimpsed something in the woman's eyes, a mixture of anger and intimate knowledge that raised new questions about Alexander's past. Later that night, as their car glided through Boston's streets toward her apartment building, Emma gathered her courage. "Victoria Hargrove seemed to know you well." Alexander's expression remained impassive as he gazed out the window. "We were briefly engaged 7 years ago." The revelation surprised her. Despite months in his company, Alexander's personal life remained largely a mystery. What happened? He turned to her, his grey eyes unreadable in the dim light. "She wasn't who I thought she was." And who was that? Someone trustworthy. The finality in his tone should have ended the conversation, but Emma persisted. "She mentioned a pattern of collecting strays. Have there been others like me?" Something flashed across his face, discomfort, perhaps even guilt. "There have been others I've mentored, yes. None quite like your situation." "What happened to them?" His jaw tightened. "Some succeeded, some didn't." The cryptic answer fueled Emma's growing unease. That night, after Blackwood's driver dropped her at her building, she made a decision. It was time to discover who Alexander Blackwood really was, beyond the carefully constructed facade he presented to the world. Her opportunity came 3 days later, when Blackwood was called away to a crisis at his Tokyo office. For the first time since her employment began, Emma had 48 hours of freedom from his watchful presence. She began with simple internet searches, finding the expected articles about his business accomplishments, charity work, and occasional appearances in society pages. But nothing about his early life, his family, how he'd built his fortune. Emma called Zoe, now studying computer science at MIT, who agreed to help dig deeper. "This guy sounds shady as hell, Em," Zoe said when they met at a coffee shop near campus. "Are you sure you're safe?" "I'm fine," Emma assured her, though the question had haunted her for months. "I just need to know who I'm really working for." Zoe's laptop displayed information she'd gathered through methods Emma didn't want to question. Alexander James Blackwood, 41, no marriage record, no children. Parents deceased. James and Eleanor Blackwood died in a car crash when he was 15. What happened to him after that? Went to live with his uncle Robert Blackwood in New York. Attended Princeton, graduated summa cum laude. Zoe scrolled through more documents. Here's where it gets interesting. His uncle died when Alexander was 25, leaving him Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, then a mid-sized company worth maybe $50 million. And now? Blackwood Enterprises is valued at over $4 billion. Zoe looked up. That's some serious growth in 16 years. Emma frowned. That timeline doesn't make sense. He didn't just expand, he completely transformed the business. That takes more than smart investments. Maybe he had help, Zoe suggested, turning her laptop to show a photo from a gala 15 years earlier. A younger Alexander stood with another man, both smiling for the camera. Meet Caleb Reynolds, his former business partner. Emma leaned closer. Former? They had some kind of falling out 12 years ago. Reynolds left Blackwood Enterprises and started his own company, Nexus Technologies. Zoe pulled up another article. They've been business rivals ever since, though Reynolds never achieved anywhere near Blackwood's success. The name triggered a memory. Emma had overheard Alexander on the phone weeks earlier, his voice uncharacteristically tight as he said, "Reynolds is making moves again. Monitor the situation." "Can you find anything about their partnership? Why they split?" Zoe shook her head. Nothing concrete, but there were rumors about unethical business practices, accusations that never went to court. She hesitated. "There's one more thing. I found a sealed court case from around that time. I couldn't access the records, but Reynolds' name appears in the file references." Emma stared at the screen, pieces beginning to align. "I need to know what was in that case." Whatever you're mixed up in." "I'm not mixed up in anything," Emma interrupted, more sharply than intended. "I'm just trying to understand the man I work for." But as she left the coffee shop, Emma knew she was lying to herself. Her interest in Alexander Blackwood had grown beyond professional curiosity. Despite her initial fear and resentment, she'd begun to admire his brilliance, his drive, even his complexity. And sometimes when their eyes met during late-night strategy sessions or quiet moments in his car, she felt something else entirely, a connection that both thrilled and terrified her. That evening, Emma returned to her apartment to find an unexpected package waiting. Inside was a first edition of Jane Eyre, her favorite novel, though she couldn't remember mentioning this to Alexander. A note inside read, "For when you tire of modern sensibilities. A." The gift was perfectly chosen, intimate in a way that suggested he knew her better than she realized. It left her unsettled, wondering just how closely he'd been observing her. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "What you seek is in the Riverside Archives. File BR 7742. Come alone. A friend." Emma stared at the message, her pulse quickening. Someone knew she was investigating Blackwood. But who? And could she trust them? The following morning, against her better judgment, Emma took a taxi to the Riverside Archives, a private research facility housing corporate and legal records. Using her Blackwood Enterprises credentials, she gained access to the reading room and requested file BR 7742. The archivist returned with a thin folder. "This is sealed under court order," she explained. "I can only release it with proper authorization." Emma produced the letter Alexander had given her months ago, designating her as his authorized representative. The archivist hesitated, then relented. 30 minutes, no photographs." Alone with the file, Emma opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were court documents from a civil case 12 years earlier, Reynolds versus Blackwood. The complaint alleged fraud, theft of intellectual property, and breach of fiduciary duty. As Emma read further, the story emerged. Alexander and Caleb, Reynolds had developed a revolutionary pharmaceutical compound together, one that would later become Blackwood's flagship drug, Neurovan. According to Reynolds, Alexander had systematically cut him out of the patents, using legal maneuvering and falsified documents to claim sole credit for the discovery. The case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, with a confidentiality agreement binding both parties. Emma sat back, stunned. This was the foundation of Blackwood's empire, a stolen innovation. It contradicted everything she'd come to believe about him, yet explained the ruthless efficiency with which he operated. As she returned the file, Emma noticed a man watching from across the reading room, middle-aged, distinguished, with calculating eyes that followed her movements. When she looked directly at him, he nodded slightly, then disappeared through a side door. Outside the archives, the same man waited beside a black SUV. "Miss Mitchell," he called, his voice cultured and confident. "I believe we have a mutual interest." Emma hesitated, every instinct telling her to walk away. "You want to know who Alexander Blackwood really is?" the man continued. "So do I." "Who are you?" He smiled, extending a business card. "Caleb Reynolds, and I think it's time we had a conversation about your employer." Emma stared at the card, torn between curiosity and loyalty to Alexander, a loyalty she couldn't fully explain even to herself. "I don't talk about my employer with strangers," she said finally. "Wise policy," Reynolds nodded approvingly. "But what if your employer isn't who you think he is? What if the man you've trusted with your future is built on lies?" His words hit too close to her own doubts. "Or what do you want from me?" "Just a conversation, off the record," he gestured to the SUV. 30 minutes of your time, and I'll tell you things about Alexander that he's kept hidden for years." Against her better judgment, Emma got into the vehicle. As it pulled away from the curb, she didn't notice the security camera above the archive's entrance, its lens capturing her departure with Caleb Reynolds. In Reynolds' downtown office, sleek but notably less impressive than Blackwood's, Emma perched uneasily on a leather chair while he poured 2 glasses of water. "I assume you read the court files," he began, settling across from her. Emma neither confirmed nor denied. "Alexander was brilliant," Reynolds continued, undeterred by her silence. "We both were, but he had something I lacked, absolute moral flexibility." "You're claiming he stole your work?" "Our work," Reynolds corrected. "We were partners, equals, until Alexander decided he deserved more than his share." He leaned forward. "But that's ancient history. I'm more concerned with what he's doing now, and why he's taken such an interest in you." Emma's defenses rose. "I'm his assistant." Reynolds' laugh held no humor. "Alexander Blackwood doesn't hire assistants off the street, Miss Mitchell, especially not girls from South Boston with no connections or experience." "How do you know where I'm from?" "I make it my business to know everything about Alexander's projects." Reynolds studied her face. "Has he told you about the others?" Emma's heart raced. "What others?" "The young women he's mentored over the years, all from similar backgrounds, struggling, desperate, talented, all given the same opportunity for transformation." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "Do you know what happened to them?" The question echoed her own unanswered query to Alexander. Emma remained silent. "They served their purpose and were discarded," Reynolds said flatly. "Once Alexander finished whatever experiment he was conducting, they became liabilities." "You're lying," Emma said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Reynolds reached into his desk and withdrew a file, sliding it across to her. "See for yourself." Inside were photographs and brief biographies of 3 young women. Each had worked closely with Alexander for approximately 1 year before disappearing from public record. "Where are they now?" Emma asked, her mouth dry. "That's the question, isn't it?" Reynolds sat back. "Alexander is playing a long game, Miss Mitchell, one that started long before you entered the picture. The question is, what's your role in it?" Emma closed the file, her mind racing. "Why tell me this? What do you want?" "Leverage," Reynolds admitted honestly. "Alexander has something I want. You have his trust, or at least his attention. You want me to spy on him. I want you to protect yourself, and perhaps in doing so help me right an old wrong." Emma stood abruptly. "I think this conversation is over." Reynolds didn't try to stop her as she headed for the door, but his parting words followed her. "When you discover the truth about why he chose you, Miss Mitchell, remember who tried to warn you." The ride back to her apartment was a blur, Emma's, thoughts churning with everything she'd learned. Was Alexander the mentor who had seen potential in her, or the manipulator Reynolds described? Were his actions motivated by genuine interest in her development, or by some hidden agenda she couldn't yet see? She entered her apartment to find Alexander himself, waiting in her living room, his expression thunderous. "You've been busy," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Emma froze, suddenly aware of how thoroughly she'd underestimated him. Of course he would have security watching her. Of course he would know about Reynolds. "I wanted to understand who I'm working for," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "By consorting with my enemies." Alexander stood, his tall frame tense with controlled anger. "What did Reynolds tell you?" "That you stole his research," That you've had other projects like me who mysteriously disappeared, that you're using me for something I don't understand. Alexander's laugh was bitter, and you believed him. Should I not? You've told me nothing about yourself, about why you really chose me. For months I've followed your lead, trusted your guidance, and all the while felt like a pawn in a game I can't see. Her words hung between them, raw with the emotion she'd kept contained for months. Alexander moved toward her, stopping when only inches separated them. You want the truth, Emma? The real reason I sought you out? The use of her first name, something he rarely did, sent a shiver through her. Yes, she whispered. His grey eyes locked with hers, searching, assessing. Then something in him seemed to break, a decision made. Your father didn't abandon you, he said finally. He was taken from you. Emma stared at him, uncomprehending. What? Your father, David Mitchell, was my friend. Alexander's voice was tight with an emotion she'd never heard from him. We worked together at Blackwood Pharmaceuticals under my uncle. David was a brilliant researcher, the true mind behind what would become Neurovan. The room seemed to tilt around Emma. My father worked for your family. Alexander nodded grimly. He and my uncle had differences. Ethical concerns about how the drug was being tested. David threatened to go public with evidence of wrongdoing. 3 days later, he disappeared. Emma sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. You're saying your uncle was responsible? I couldn't prove it. I was young, still learning the business. By the time I inherited the company after my uncle's death, the trail was cold. Alexander's face hardened. But Reynolds knew. He was my uncle's right-hand man, the one who implemented the plan to silence your father. That's not what Reynolds told me. Of course not. Alexander sat beside her, his proximity both comforting and overwhelming. Reynolds reinvented himself. After my uncle died, he became my partner to avoid scrutiny, then crafted the narrative that I stole his work when I finally forced him out. Emma's mind raced, trying to reconcile these contradictory accounts. Why should I believe you over him? Alexander reached into his jacket and withdrew a worn photograph, the same one she'd glimpsed in his hand the night she'd first left for his dinner. He handed it to her silently. Emma looked down at a much younger version of her mother, laughing beside a man with Emma's eyes and smile. Behind them stood a younger Alexander, his arm around the shoulders of Emma's father. I've spent 15 years building the resources and power to uncover the truth about what happened to David, Alexander said quietly. To find evidence that would expose Reynolds and my uncle's other conspirators. And me, Emma's voice trembled. Where do I fit into this? Vendetta? Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You were never meant to be part of this. But when I saw your picture in your mother's loan application, the resemblance to David, I couldn't ignore it. I had to know if you had his brilliance, his integrity. So I've been what? A test? An experiment to see if I measure up to your memory of my father? At first, perhaps, he admitted. But you've become more than that, Emma. You've become... He hesitated, seemingly unable to find the right words. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. For the first time, Emma saw real emotion, breaking through his carefully maintained control, raw and unguarded. I need to think, she said, standing abruptly. This is too much. Alexander nodded, rising as well. Of course. But Emma, be careful. Now that Reynolds knows you're important, to me he'll stop at nothing to use you against me. Important to me. The words echoed in her mind as he left. Alone in her apartment, Emma stared at the photograph of her parents with a younger, smiling Alexander Blackwood. Everything she thought she knew about her father, her past, her present situation had been upended. Two powerful men, each with their own version of the truth, each warning her against the other, each with reasons to lie. And somewhere in the middle stood Emma Mitchell, no longer certain of anything except the growing realization that her feelings for Alexander Blackwood had become dangerously complex, a tangled web of distrust, Gratitude, resentment, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. What she couldn't know was that both men were now accelerating their plans, with her unwittingly at the center of a decades-old conflict about to reach its breaking point. The week following Alexander's revelation passed in a haze for Emma. She threw herself into her work, reviewing contracts and attending meetings with Sue. Mechanical efficiency, while her mind churned with unanswered questions. Alexander maintained a careful distance, his demeanor professional but guarded, the intimacy of their last conversation locked away behind his customary reserve. On Friday afternoon, Emma sat in Blackwood's downtown office, half listening as he discussed acquisition strategies with his executive team. Her attention drifted to the wall of windows behind him, Boston's skyline gleaming in the late autumn sunlight. "Emma?" Alexander's voice broke through her thoughts. The conference room had emptied. They were alone. "I'm sorry," she said, straightening. "I was distracted." His expression softened. "Understandably, it's been a difficult week." The acknowledgement surprised her. Since their confrontation, they'd carefully avoided any reference to her father or Reynolds' accusations. "I've been thinking," Emma began hesitantly, "about what you told me, about my father." Alexander's posture tensed almost imperceptibly. "And?" "I want to see everything you have on him, every document, every piece of evidence about his disappearance. If what you've told me is true, I deserve to know." He studied her face for a long moment. "Yes, you do." He rose, buttoning his suit jacket. "But not here. There are too many eyes and ears at Blackwood Tower." "Where then?" "My home." At her surprised expression, he added, "My private residence has security measures even Reynolds can't penetrate. The files you want to see never leave those walls." In nearly 4 months working for Alexander Blackwood, Emma had never seen his actual home. His life outside the office remained largely a mystery, glimpsed only through occasional personal calls or the rare mention of his weekend activities. "When?" "Tonight, if you're available." His tone was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes betrayed a deeper urgency. Emma nodded. "I'll be ready." As she gathered her things to leave, Alexander called after her, "Emma, come alone. No calls to Zoe or your mother about where you're going." The warning sent a chill through her. "You still don't trust me." "It's not about trust. It's about keeping you safe." His grey eyes held hers. "There are people who would go to extreme lengths to access what I'm about to show you." At 7 o'clock, Alexander's personal driver collected Emma from her apartment building. Instead of the usual sedan, she was surprised to find Alexander himself behind the wheel of a sleek Aston Martin. "I thought we'd avoid the usual protocols tonight," he explained as she slid into the passenger seat. "My security team is thorough, but they report to my board of directors. What we're discussing doesn't concern them." They drove north out of Boston, the city lights fading behind them as they followed the coastline. Emma watched Alexander's profile, noticing the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel with unusual force. "You're nervous," she observed, surprising. Herself with the directness. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perceptive. Yes, I am." "Why?" "You're finally getting what you wanted. Showing me your evidence against Reynolds, bringing me fully into your confidence." Alexander glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. "That's precisely why. Once you know everything, things between us will change irreversibly." The implication hung between them as they turned onto a private drive, approaching a security gate that opened automatically. Beyond lay a modern mansion, of glass and stone, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. "Welcome to Ravenswood," Alexander said as they pulled into a circular driveway. The house was breathtaking, austere yet elegant, with clean lines and dramatic angles that complemented the rugged coastline, yet it felt strangely impersonal, lacking the warmth of a true home. Inside, the soaring great room featured floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing the moonlit ocean. Minimalist furniture and abstract art created an atmosphere of restrained luxury. "You live here alone?" Emma asked, noting the silence that enveloped them. The staff leaves at 6 unless I have guests. Alexander removed his suit jacket, draping it over a chair. Without it, in just his white shirt and dark trousers, he seemed almost vulnerable. Would you like something to drink before we begin? This might be a long night. Emma accepted a glass of water, following him down a hallway to a wood-paneled study. One wall was lined with books. Another held a large digital screen. Alexander pressed his palm against a hidden scanner, and a section of shelving slid aside to reveal a concealed safe. Some things are too sensitive for digital storage, he explained, removing a thick file folder. He placed it on his desk between them. The label read simply, Mitchell, D. Emma stared at it, suddenly afraid of what she might find inside. Alexander seemed to sense her hesitation. We can stop here, he said quietly. Return to our professional arrangement. Put these questions behind us. Emma shook her head. I need to know. She opened the folder. Inside were photographs, reports, emails, a meticulous record of her father's life and work. She saw her parents' wedding photo, pictures of her mother pregnant, even a hospital image of infant Emma in her father's arms. You've been collecting these for years, she whispered. Since before you were born, Alexander confirmed, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't identify. David was more than my colleague. He was my mentor, the only person who believed in me after my parents died. Emma looked up at him, seeing raw pain in his expression. You loved him. He was the brother I never had. Alexander moved to a cabinet, retrieving a bottle of scotch and pouring himself a measure. When he disappeared, everyone accepted the official story, that he'd abandoned his family, started a new life somewhere else. Everyone except me. Why didn't you tell my mother? All these years, she believed he left us willingly. Alexander's expression darkened. I tried in the beginning, but I was 25 with no proof and no power. Your mother had been told by the police, by my uncle, by everyone that David had simply left. Why would she believe otherwise based on my word alone? Emma continued. Through the file, finding employment records, security badges, research notes in her father's handwriting, then she reached a section marked Neurovan Trial X42 and felt her blood run cold. The documents detailed experimental drug trials conducted by Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, trials with protocols that violated ethical standards and possibly laws. Her father's notes grew increasingly agitated, documenting severe side effects the company was concealing. He was going to become a whistleblower, Emma said, looking up at Alexander. He nodded grimly. David discovered that my uncle was falsifying safety data to fast-track FDA approval. Neurovan wasn't ready for human trials. The animal testing showed neurological damage in nearly 30% of cases, but my uncle saw billions in potential profits and pushed forward anyway. And Reynolds? What was his role? Alexander's face hardened. He oversaw the trials directly. When your father threatened to go public, Reynolds was the one who suggested they needed to handle the situation. Emma's hands trembled as she turned to the final section, labeled Surveillance. It contained photographs of her father in the days before his disappearance, entering the Blackwood building, meeting with unknown men, even one of him holding a young Emma at a park, unaware of being watched. The last photo showed him entering a car with two unidentified men. The date stamp was April 17, 2002, the day he vanished. This is all circumstantial, Emma said, though her heart pounded with certainty. There's nothing here that would hold up in court. That's why I haven't moved against Reynolds yet. Alexander sat heavily in his chair. For 15 years, I've been building my company, accumulating power and resources, waiting for Reynolds to make a mistake that would expose him. Is that the only reason you took me on? To use me against Reynolds somehow? The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard. He met her gaze steadily. At first, perhaps, when I saw your mother's loan application cross my desk, I recognized her name immediately. The coincidence seemed too perfect. David's daughter, now grown in financial trouble. He looked away, shame crossing his features. I arranged the loan, the impossible terms, all to bring you into my orbit. The confirmation of her suspicions should have angered Emma, but instead she felt a strange calm. And now, what am I? To you now, Alexander. His eyes returned to hers, something unguarded in their depths. Now you're essential, not to my plans, but to me. The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with implications neither was ready to voice. Emma stood abruptly, needing distance from the intensity of his gaze. She moved to the windows, looking out at the dark ocean beyond. If what you're saying is true, then Reynolds is responsible for my father's disappearance, she said finally. But all you have are theories and circumstantial evidence from 15 years ago. Not entirely. Alexander pressed a button on his desk and the digital screen illuminated with financial records. 3 months ago, I discovered unusual transfers from one of Reynolds' shell companies to an account in the Cayman Islands. The same account received payments in 2002, immediately after your father disappeared. Emma studied the transactions. You think this was payment for... She couldn't finish the sentence. For eliminating a problem, Alexander finished grimly. The payments resumed recently because Reynolds is cleaning house, removing anyone who might connect him to what happened 15 years ago. Why now? Because Nexus Technologies is failing. Reynolds is desperate for a lifeline, and Hargrove Industries is offering to acquire his company if he can prove his claim to the original Neurovan patents. Alexander's expression darkened. Patents he believes should have been his, not mine, and certainly not your father's. The pieces clicked into place for Emma. That's why he approached me. He thinks I might have evidence of his ownership claim. Or he hopes to use you to discredit me before I can expose him. Alexander moved to stand beside her at the window. Either way, you're in danger, Emma. Reynolds is cornered, and that makes him unpredictable. The proximity between them was electric, charged with unspoken emotion. Emma turned to face him, suddenly aware of how little space separated them. So what happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's expression shifted, vulnerability replacing his usual control. That depends on you, on whether you believe me, whether you trust me enough to... A sharp sound from the front of the house cut him off. His posture instantly changed, tension radiating through his frame. Stay here, he commanded, moving swiftly to his desk and pressing a button that locked the study door. From a drawer, he withdrew a handgun, checking it with practiced efficiency. Emma's eyes widened. What's happening? The perimeter alarm was triggered. His voice was calm but deadly serious. Someone's on the property who shouldn't be. He moved to a wall panel, bringing up security camera feeds that showed the grounds around the mansion. On one screen, dark figures moved with tactical precision toward the house. Reynolds, Alexander said grimly. He must have followed us. Fear coursed through Emma. What do they want? The evidence against him, and you. Alexander's jaw tightened. I need to get you out of here. He pressed another hidden panel, revealing a concealed door behind the bookshelves. This leads to a tunnel that exits near the boathouse. There's a car in the garage there with keys inside. Take it and drive back to Boston. What about you? I'll hold them off, buy you time. His expression was resolute. Emma, listen carefully. In your apartment, behind the painting in your bedroom, is a safe. The combination is your birthday. Inside is everything you need. Evidence against Reynolds, documents proving your father's role in developing Neurovan, enough to expose him publicly. You put a safe in my apartment. Under other circumstances, she might have been outraged at the violation. I needed a contingency. He handed her the file on her father. Take this too. If anything happens to me... No. Emma grabbed his arm, suddenly terrified. I'm not leaving you here. Alexander's expression softened momentarily. He touched her face, gently, the first time he'd ever done so. You have to. This isn't your fight. It is now, she insisted. It's about my father, too. The sound of breaking glass somewhere in the house made them both freeze. There's no time to argue, Alexander said, pulling her toward the hidden passage. Once you're safe, call this number. He pressed a card into her hand. Tell them Ravenswood is compromised. They'll know what to do. Before she could protest further, the security screens showed men entering the front of the house. Alexander pushed her into the passage, his expression intense. "Emma, Whatever he intended to say was lost as he closed the hidden door between them, plunging her into dimly lit darkness. Heart pounding, Emma followed the narrow passage, clutching the file to her chest. She heard muffled sounds of confrontation from the house behind her, but forced herself to keep moving, emerging finally into the cool night air near a small boathouse. Inside, she found the promised car, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. As she started the engine, her mind raced with indecision. Every instinct told her to flee to save herself, but something deeper held her back. Alexander was facing Reynolds alone because of her father. After everything she'd learned tonight, she couldn't simply abandon him. Instead of driving toward Boston, Emma circled back toward the main house, keeping her headlights off. She parked in a sheltered area and approached cautiously, hearing raised voices through a broken window. 15 years waiting for this moment, Reynolds. Alexander's voice carried clearly. Did you really think I wouldn't be prepared? Always. So arrogant, another voice, presumably Reynolds, replied. Even now when you've lost everything. Peering through the window, Emma saw Alexander standing in the great room, his gun now held by one of Reynolds' men. Reynolds himself circled Alexander like a predator, several armed men positioned around the room. Where is she? Reynolds demanded. Gone. And so is the evidence. Reynolds laughed coldly. No matter. Once you're eliminated, there will be no one left to challenge my claim to Neurovan. The girl is simply insurance. Emma's blood ran cold at the casual way he discussed Alexander's fate. Drawing back from the window, she considered her options. She had the car, the file, the means to escape, yet the thought of leaving Alexander to Reynolds was unthinkable. But what could she do against armed men? She was no action hero, just a girl from South Boston who'd been thrust into a world of wealth and danger beyond her imagination. Then she remembered something from their earlier conversation. I arranged the loan, the impossible terms, all to bring you into my orbit. Alexander had been manipulating events from the beginning, which meant he'd anticipated different scenarios, including this one. The card he'd given her. Emma pulled it from her pocket, examining it in the dim moonlight. On one side was a phone number, on the other, small text she hadn't noticed before. Boathouse safe, 12/17/86. Her father's birthday. Moving silently, Emma returned to the boathouse, searching frantically until she found a small safe hidden beneath a workbench. The combination worked, and inside she found not weapons, but a small device that looked like a remote control with a single red button protected by a plastic cover. Attached was a note in Alexander's handwriting. Security override. Last resort. Only. Emma hesitated only briefly before flipping the cover and pressing the button. Instantly, the grounds around the mansion were plunged into darkness as all power was cut. Seconds later, she heard shouting from the house as emergency alarms began blaring. Taking advantage of the confusion, Emma raced back toward the main house. Through the chaos, she could make out Reynolds's men scrambling in the darkness, disoriented by the sudden power failure. She slipped in through the broken window, staying low and moving toward where she'd last seen Alexander. In the dim emergency lighting, she found him engaged in a brutal struggle with one of Reynolds's men, his face bloody but his movements precise. As Alexander subdued his opponent, Emma heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Reynolds himself, his expression contorted with rage. You, he spat, David Mitchell's daughter, always interfering just like your father. My father was a hero, Emma replied, backing away as he advanced. He tried to stop you from hurting innocent people. Reynolds laughed harshly. Your father was a naive idealist who got in the way of progress, just like you're doing now. He lunged forward suddenly, catching Emma off guard. His hand closed around her throat, pushing her back against the wall. I should have eliminated you along with Alexander, he hissed. Tied up the loose ends? Completely. Emma struggled against his grip, panic rising as her air was cut off. Through darkening vision, she saw Alexander appear behind Reynolds, his expression transformed by cold fury. What happened next unfolded with brutal efficiency. Alexander pulled Reynolds away from Emma, throwing him to the floor with such force that the older man gasped in pain. "It's over, Reynolds," Alexander said, his voice deadly calm. "The authorities have been alerted. My security team is on their way. Your men are already being detained outside." Reynolds' face contorted with hatred. "You think this ends here? I still have connections your money can't touch, Blackwood. Even if I go down, I'll make sure to take you with me." "No," Alexander replied, kneeling beside the fallen man. "You'll face justice for what you did to David Mitchell and all the others you've destroyed over the years." As if on cue, new lights appeared outside, police vehicles and what appeared to be federal agents storming the property. "You planned this," Reynolds realized, his face paling. "You used the girl as bait." Alexander's expression remained impassive. "I protected her, unlike you, who would have disposed of her the moment she became inconvenient." Emma watched the exchange in stunned silence, still processing Reynolds' admission. He hadn't denied his role in her father's fate. He'd practically confirmed it. As FBI agents entered the house, Alexander moved to Emma's side, his hand gentle on her arm. "Are you all right?" She nodded, unable to find words as Reynolds was handcuffed and led away, already demanding his lawyer. "I told you to escape," Alexander said, a hint of reproof in his voice despite the relief in his eyes. "I couldn't leave. You," Emma replied simply. In the chaotic hours that followed, Emma watched Alexander operate in his element, coordinating with federal agents, providing evidence, transforming from the man who had nearly died protecting her to the powerful CEO whose resources had finally trapped his enemy. Dawn was breaking over the ocean when they finally had a moment alone. They stood on the cliff edge behind his damaged home, watching pink light spill across the water. "Reynolds will face charges for your father's disappearance," Alexander said quietly. "The evidence may be circumstantial, but coupled with financial records and testimony from his former associates, it should be enough." "What happens now?" Emma asked, hugging herself against the morning chill. Alexander removed his jacket, draping it around her shoulders in a gesture that felt both protective and intimate. "That depends on what you want, Emma." "What I want?" "Your original contract with me is fulfilled. Your mother's debt is cleared. You're free to go to pursue whatever life you choose." His voice remained steady, but Emma sensed the effort it cost him. "I can arrange for college tuition, an apartment, whatever you need. To start over." Emma studied his profile, seeing past the controlled exterior to the man beneath. The boy who had lost his parents, the young man who had lost his mentor, the ruthless businessman who had compromised his own morality in pursuit of justice. "And if I don't want to leave?" she asked softly. Alexander turned to her, surprise and something like hope flickering across his features. "Emma, after everything that's happened, everything I've done, manipulating you, putting you in danger, you did those things to find justice for my father," she interrupted. "And yes, your methods were extreme, sometimes wrong. But I understand. Why now?" She stepped closer to him, feeling a certainty she hadn't experienced since the day she'd first entered his office. "The truth is, Alexander, these past months have changed me. I'm not just David Mitchell's daughter anymore, or Karen, Mitchell's desperate girl from South Boston. I'm someone new, someone stronger, more capable." She met his gaze steadily. "Someone who sees you, the real you, with all your flaws and strengths." Alexander reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing her cheek. "And what do you see?" "A man who spent 15 years fighting for justice, who built an empire to right a wrong, who risked everything to protect me when he could have saved himself." Emma leaned into his touch. "A man I've grown to care for despite everything." The admission hung between them, fragile and powerful. "I'm not offering you employment, Emma," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you stay, it would be as my equal, my partner in every sense." Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. "I think I've earned that position, don't you?" His answer wasn't in words, but in the way he drew her to him, his kiss both tender and fierce, a promise and a new beginning. 6 months later, Emma stood at the podium in the newly established David Mitchell Foundation for Medical Ethics, addressing a room full of industry leaders and press. Beside her mother in the front row sat Alexander, his expression proud as she announced their first initiative, a whistleblower protection program for pharmaceutical researchers. "My father believed that medical advancement should never come at the cost of human dignity," Emma concluded. "Today we honor his legacy by ensuring that ethical voices are heard and protected." The applause was deafening as she stepped down, moving immediately to Alexander's side. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with familiar comfort. "He would be proud of you," Alexander murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Of us," Emma corrected gently. "This is our legacy now." As the crowd dispersed, Karen approached them, her eyes shining with tears. "David always said knowledge was power," she said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "He never could have imagined how powerful you would become." Later that night, in the penthouse apartment they now shared, Emma and Alexander stood on the balcony, overlooking the city where their unlikely story had begun. The golden lights below mirrored the stars above, a fitting symmetry for their transformed lives. "Any regrets?" Alexander asked, his arms encircling her from behind. Emma leaned back against him, considering the question. The journey from that desperate girl accepting an impossible loan to the woman she was now, confident, educated, loved, had been neither easy nor straightforward. There had been pain, betrayal, moments of doubt and fear, but there had also been truth finally. Justice for her father, a chance to make real difference in the world. And most unexpectedly, a love that had grown from the unlikeliest soil, suspicion, transformed to trust, manipulation giving way to honesty, two wounded souls finding healing in each other. "No regrets," she answered, turning in his arms to face him. "Only gratitude for the price that brought us here." Alexander's smile, once so rare, now her daily gift, brightened his entire face. "And what price was that?" "Dreams," Emma replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Dreams we never knew we had until they came true." As their lips met, Emma Mitchell, once trapped by circumstance, now freed by love and truth, knew that some debts could never be calculated in dollars and cents, only in the currency of transformed hearts and redeemed souls. Dear listeners, we hope Emma and Alexander's journey of truth and transformation has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that sometimes our greatest challenges can lead to unexpected blessings, and that justice, while slow, can ultimately prevail. For more captivating tales that explore the complexities of human connection, we've prepared a special playlist of equally moving narratives. You'll find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that delve into life's most profound mysteries and emotions. Don't miss our upcoming content,